Hello and welcome to this week's show of Weighted Donuts. I'm Wayne Unger, and my guest tonight is MLB columnist Barry Bloom. Barry, welcome and thank you for coming on.
Glad to be on, Wayne.
Great. So, Barry, you seem to be, from what I read, you seem to be like zeroed in on the West Coast. A lot of Dodgers, a lot of D-backs. Do you think the Dodgers have anything to worry about, or you think they're still safely gonna, skid home into first place?
Yeah, well, I'm from New York also, and it depends on the year. Last year, I was based in New York for most of the year, so I did a lot of Yankees and Mets. And this year we've been more regionally based, and we have a place in Phoenix. So I've done more of the NL West this year, and it just happened that the Diamondbacks and Dodgers have had, two very good years. I think that the Dodgers, they've hit a spot here which has revealed a lot of their weaknesses heading into the playoffs. And, if a lot of this had happened in May, I don't think anybody would have been too upset about it. You make adjustments. But, when the baseball season starts to wane, which is what's happening, and you're finding yourself without a center fielder, without a left fielder, without, second baseman really, and you're, the guy that you went out to get to bolster your pitching staff at the trade deadline is completely screwed up. If there's a bunch of issues here that have to be dealt with not too much time to go. And I think what's happened is that, when you look at the schedule, I mean, they have 6 games to go against the Giants, 3 against the Padres, 4 against the Phillies. I mean, just by attrition, they're going to play 500 ball the rest of the year, and they're going to win the division and still win the division by a lot. But the question then becomes, with the Diamondbacks having pretty well disrupted them during this streak of winning 6 in a row, 3 at home and 3 just concluded at Dodger Stadium, if the Diamondbacks survive the wild card game, which they look like they'll host right now, then they wind up against the Dodgers in the NLCS. And, are the Dodgers going to survive that series against the Diamondbacks? And I think it really puts up the question now whether they will. There is just a tremendous amount of pressure on the Dodgers after all these years and the amount of money they spend every year on that team to not only get to the World Series, but win for the first time since 1988. And, the Diamondbacks go completely under the radar. Unless you're there in Arizona, you really don't know what they have. You don't know that they're going to throw up, Greinke against Kershaw in game 1 and probably, Robbie Ray against Darvish in game 2. And those are 2 of the top pitchers in the National League going up against, the top pitcher probably in the National League and a guy who should be a lot better than he is right now if that's what the Dodgers decide to do. I mean, at this point, I could very well see Darvish not even being on the playoff roster. He's so screwed up. But, it's a long answer to your question. I think they're fine for the regular season, but now they're very vulnerable going into the playoffs.
Well, do you think it's also a case of teams? They have their weaknesses, but basically all of a sudden now they're not getting these fantastic late inning comebacks. Do you think it's a case of like their offense is just sputtering, or do you also think it's a case of scouting catching up with their weaknesses as well?
Well, I think it's their offense is certainly sputtering. I mean, if you look at their guys, I mean, basically, Justin Turner is the only one who's really a semblance of hitting at this point, and Chris Taylor too to a certain extent. But I mean, to me, they were a team that was like 55 games over 500 and 20 games up in the division. And then they decided that their pitching staff wasn't good enough, so they had to go out and get Darvish, and that Jock Peterson wasn't good enough in center field, so they went out and got Curtis Granderson. And Granderson is hitting under 100 for them, and Darvish has a 6-point-something ERA in the last 4 starts for them, and they're tinkering around with his release point and his mechanics, and it's something that you just don't do at this time of year. I mean, if you've noticed the problem, and he's a free agent anyway, and a rental, and if he comes back next year and you re-sign him, then you work with him. But if you're not, just let him do what he's going to do, because the last thing you want him to do is thinking about all this stuff now when he goes out to the mound. And mentally, it's not functional. And, while, baseball analytics and the deep analysis that every team does now, especially with their own players, it's great for the people who are doing the analysis, but it's not great for the players. Most of them are not the brightest lights on the planet, and you can overload them with too much information about what they should and shouldn't do, and where they should play and shouldn't play, and what pitch they should hit and shouldn't hit, and where they have to be on a particular place in the infield, where a pitcher has to throw a pitch so that formation and that shift works. I mean, so much of this has changed in baseball, and it's gotten so microscopic that you've overburdened the players at a certain point. And then if you look at their team, I mean, essentially they don't have a Paul Goldschmidt or a Mike Trout. They don't have a top 5 player. They just don't. So, I mean, they rely on, a lot of team. Corey Seager's been out the last, 2 weeks with an elbow issue. That's a big guy out of the lineup, and he's as close to a top player as you get. Cody Bellinger has had a great year, but, in the whole moving around of the Granderson deal and Edgar Gonzalez coming back off the disabled list, Bellinger winds up in the outfield, twists his ankle, goes on the disabled list, and he's hitting about 200 since he came back with 2 home runs and 3 RBIs. So there's a disruption factor there. It's like the old Dodgers, and I'm old enough, and so are you, to have seen where baseball was. When I first started, my first year, really full year covering baseball, was Tommy Lasorda's first year managing the Dodgers. And they ran out the same rotation all the time. They ran out the same infield, the same outfield. Basically, the only thing they had different there was, Steve Yeager and Ferguson, we used to like platoon as catching, and they'd throw Ferguson out in the outfield every once in a while. But I mean, really, it was the same team and the same lineup every day. In this case, these guys, the brain trust of the Dodgers, the gurus, are constantly tinkering with the lineup, tinkering and bringing guys back up and down from the minor leagues like it's a fantasy game. And it's not only them, but a lot of teams do that now. And so you have a constant change in the composure of the locker room, chemistry. It really makes a big difference. So I'm sure there's an additive to, the scouting issue that you mentioned. I think there was also, baseball is kind of cruel like this, where, when you're going well, everything trends in that direction. Balls that you hit go fair instead of foul. You make the great catches. You get the base hit in the right situation. And then when it doesn't, when it turns against you, you can't break your way out of it. And the harder you try, the worse it gets. And then something has to happen to break you out of it and send you back in the other direction. It's got a life of its own and a mystical quality to it, which I'm always in awe of, because, I watch it happen and you just go, well, these guys, it's not this team's time right now, because nothing's going right in their direction, or the opposite way. So, the Dodgers is just in that spot now. And as I said, it's too late in the season for there to be too much of a correction. And there's 21 or 22 games for them, and they really need to start making a correction now, because if they get the Diamondbacks in the first round and get by them, then they've got to beat either the Cubs or the Nationals, to make it to the World Series. So they're going to have to beat three really good teams, probably the Indians when they get to the World Series, to just win it all. And there's a hard road ahead for them.
Well, talking about how things all of a sudden go wrong, let's turn our attention back to New York. Any opinion on what's going on with Aaron Judge?
He's got 39 home runs, doesn't he? Didn't he hit another home run today? I mean, what's wrong with Aaron Judge?
He did hit another home run, but since the All-Star break, still he's hitting under 200. He's slugging under 400. So you think Aaron Judge has been just fine since the All-Star break?
No, I don't think he's been fine, but I think what you had with him is that if you look at the time he was up last year, where the Yankees brought him up when they made all the changes last year and brought him up for the minors, what did he bat? $179 or something, during that 20-game period before he got hurt, and that was it for the season. Then he came out this year gangbusters the first half of the season, and I think that is a matter of teams making adjustments to him. He's a big guy with a big swing and a big strike zone. And, he has gained a lot of patience at the plate to take pitches, which he wasn't doing last year. But I think there's a regression of the mean there where he's just coming back down. But that doesn't mean he's still not a great threat, and that he's still not capable of great things, and that, he's going to make adjustments and, keep going. I mean, the guy is, certainly, Gary Sanchez had a lousy first half of the season after the great second half he had last year, or even mediocre, and he's played a lot better too. So, they're kids. I mean, if you talk to anybody in the Yankees, and I have, I mean, nobody expected either Sanchez or Judge to evolve into the players that they've evolved this quickly into. So, you take it as it is, and, you hope that they continue it.
Right. I mean, in no way, listen, I'm a Yankee fan. In no way was I suggesting, that it's been a disappointment, but it's, what's happened to him in the second half almost mirrors what's been happening, what's happened to the Dodgers in the past few weeks.
Well, I mean, I think that essentially, I mean, the Judge is not like Trout or Harper. He's just not that. He's not that complete a player. And I think that, or Goldschmidt, who essentially are my top three, and then you add Bryant to it. Those are probably the top four young players in the game to me. Guys who they do it every day. They make adjustments. They have their little mini slumps, but they're always really on top of it. And I don't put Judge yet into that category, and I don't know that he's ever going to be. But for potential and threat and all those kind of things, and I'm not saying you were, saying it was disappointing. I think it was just unrealistic for anybody to think that Judge was going to continue where he was at, considering, where he was last year and how soon it is that he's gotten to the major leagues with the amount of, I would say the small amount of scrutiny that he got to come in. So
no, I agree.
The question will now be, once he gets through all this, how is he going to settle in next year, and which is going to be the real Judge? Is he going to find a median there where he's going to be able to perform, or else are they going to just constantly find the weak points and go at those and make his life miserable?
Right. I mean, yeah. Listen, no one expected him to sustain like 320, 450, and almost 700. From what I see, they're getting him a lot with the high heat, and people forget just a few years ago, although Mike Trout still had a great year, Mike Trout was striking out at an exorbitant rate off of the high fastball. He made the adjustment, but and that's basically what happens in baseball. It's one day you're the pigeon, one day you're the statue. It's all about adjustments. So, but when the year started, before the season, who did you pick to go to the World Series and to win it?
I'm a very, to me, I'm always the defending champion really has to show me that they're susceptible or things have dramatically changed with their lineup to feel that, they weren't capable of coming back and doing the whole thing all over again. And until somebody knocks them off, to me, they're the favorite. So my feeling is, having watched the Cubs, especially being in Arizona a lot from all the spring training this year, I never got to Florida. I watched the Cubs a lot, and their organization is so deep talent-wise that I just felt that the Cubs' chances of getting back to the World Series and winning again were pretty good. And likewise, like I mentioned earlier, Cleveland's out there, Matt, I think Tito and Madden they all both have their strengths and weaknesses, but they're two of the better managers in baseball. And I saw the Indians a lot in spring training too, and where the Indians went to the World Series with 2/5 of their starting rotation on the shelf and went to the last pitch of the World Series before the Cubs beat them. Now, except for Salazar being in and out with injuries again this year, the Indians have the full complement. Plus, to me, they've got a great bullpen, and they've got the best starting pitcher in the American League in Corey Kluber. So, and I think they're stronger offensively with Encarnacion in there. And so, to me, I know it hasn't happened very often. It hasn't happened, I don't think, since the 77, 78 Yankees and Dodgers, where the same two teams have come back at each other and repeated. But I think this year, I looked at Cleveland against the Cubs again, and this time Cleveland winning it.
Okay, it's for the second year in a row. I picked the Astros over the Cubs for the second year in a row. So I'm looking a little better this year, but we'll see. Listen, it's always fun to pick your teams at the beginning of the season. So
right,
and,
I think it would be interesting an interesting American League Championship Series would be the Astros against the Indians. With the Indians having the recent experience of going to the last pitch of the World Series. To me, they're much like Kansas City was a couple of years ago when they lost to the Giants in the last pitch of the 2014 World Series and then came back the next year with a purpose and beat the Mets in 5 games. That's where I look at the Indians, and I look at the Astros, even with the addition of Verlander, to Keuchel and McCune and all the guys that they've got. They're certainly a talented team, but they're going to be there for the first time if they make it that far, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens in that matchup.
And let me ask you, teams that are, who do you see making a move next year? Like who do you see as a team that's evolving and they're scratching the surface a little bit, and you think next year like they'll contend. Now that we're almost through this year.
Baseball is so strange right now. going into this season, I would have never said after the way the Diamondbacks played last year, coming off of an improving year, but they haven't had a 500 season since they won the division title in 2011. And I wouldn't have, I picked the Diamondbacks maybe to improve from 69 wins to 75 or 76 and not go to 90. I mean, so the way baseball is built right now, you know, you can't really tell coming off a season, you know, is what the White Sox are doing, where they converted over to, you know, a bunch of young kids this year and got rid of all their veterans. Does that mean that they're going to be the team that's going to be up and coming next year? It's hard to tell because, you know, all those players, you know, are just still evolving. And plus, there's just so many bad teams in baseball right now, especially in the National League, that I couldn't pick a team for you and say, you know, I think the Brewers have, you know, basically made a very good stab at, you know, being a lot better. And with a few more adds and adjustments, you know, they could be a team that could win next year. And, you know, over in the American League, I think the Angels have far outdistanced what anybody anticipated, particularly with the type of injuries they've had to their pitching staff over the course of the year. Their, you know, basically bullpen problems. They've had a different closer in different parts of the season, yet they're right there for the wild card. And Seattle also keeps coming, and, you know, you just wonder when they're going to get over the hump. So, you know, there's a couple of teams there. You know, Tampa's had, you know, a much better year than anybody thought. Minnesota also has made great gains this year, and they're a good young team. I like them a lot. So, you know, there's a few of them there that, you know, that have possibilities.
On a personal level, what's your favorite thing about baseball?
You know, my favorite thing about baseball is the unpredictability of it, really. That as much of an expert as you can be at it, it's almost impossible, you know, to determine, you know, with who's going to emerge as a great player, who's going to get hurt, you know, what the makeup of the team is going to be. I mean, every night you go to the ballpark, it's something different. I mean, I've seen so many great things happen on the field. I've been at so many, over 40 years, I've seen so many records broken, so many, you know, streaks. You know, just this year alone, I've been at, I've seen 2 triple plays this year. I think I've only seen one my entire career before that. I've seen, I was at Albert Pujols hitting the 600 homer this year. I was just at J.D. Martinez hitting 4 homers in a game, which has only happened 18 times in Major League history. And I got to see that the other night. And then I got to see the Diamondbacks set a franchise record by winning their 13th in a row last night. You just, you know, there are those things where, you know, you follow Bonds and you're waiting for him to pass Ruth, pass Aaron. You know, I was there for that. I was there for, you know, Rose beating Cobb's all-time hit record. You know, and those are the things that you follow, you anticipate. I was there when Ripken tied and passed Garrett for the consecutive game streak. But then, you know, you go to games and you just don't know when you're going to see a no-hitter or somebody's going to have a performance like Martinez the other night. And then you look at the list of, like, the 18 players who've hit 4 homers in a game. And I was telling Martinez, I said, do you know, really, do you study baseball history? And he goes, well, I studied the game, but I'm really not a big guy with baseball history. And I said, well, when you wake up tomorrow, look at the list of people you're on now. Because among them, the people who didn't hit 4 home runs is greater than the ones that have. Because of the top 28 players on the all-time home run list, only Mays, Schmidt, and Gehrig have hit 4 homers in a game. That means that you have, Bonds never did it, A-Rod never did it, Ruth never did it, Griffey never did it. I mean, go down the list. Aaron, it's incredible. And then, it's just amazing because it's such a hard game to play. There's so much failure in it, especially for a hitter, where, you look at it and you go, Tony Gwynn hit 338 lifetime in his career, and it's the best batting average of any player since Williams retired in 1960. I think he hit 341. And that means that Gwynn, as one of the greatest hitters in history, succeeded only 3.338 times in 10 every time he went to the plate. And most guys do it, 25% of the time. So just the nature of it is really incredible. And you watch the athletes and you talk to them, you live with them and you deal with them and you see how they deal with this horrendous failure all the time. When, a guy like Kershaw, who is a tremendous guy and a tremendous pitcher, but you watch him like in a playoff game for a couple of years ago, he's in the seventh inning of the game that he seems completely in control of. And then all of a sudden he lets up, 5 singles and a double before Mattingly even has him out of the game. And I find out later, talking to people on the team, that he's tipping his pitches in the stretch. The Cardinals pick it up, and that's why they were beating the hell out of him. And, suddenly Kershaw doesn't want to even admit it or make any adjustments. I mean, there are so many things, the inside of a play or a game, or, there are many things within every game that are just really managerial decisions and why a guy did this and that and whether it worked and how it blew up in your face. I mean, it's just such a game rich with texture. I guess I could go on and on about it.
You know what? Your answer is usually, that's usually what I get from everybody. Maybe not in the same exact way you put it, but again, it's the unpredictability. You never know, what you're going to see and what's going to happen. I remember as a kid, I remember the Mets one time in the early 60s rocking Sandy Koufax. And it was like, what's going on here? And I believe it was one of the Bob Millers came in and held them down. The Dodgers came back. But, there it is. The Mets were rocking Sandy Koufax. The one time I went to Boston, this is when the Yankees were terrible. I'm guessing it was around 90, I think it was 93 or 92. I lose track. But Clemens was pitching for the Red Sox, and the Yankees rocked them that day. Danny Tartable hit a shot so deep into center field it just disappeared. So again, yeah, I agree. It's the unpredictability. You just never know. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that. I want to turn to something else. When you voted for the Hall of Fame this year, you voted for some. I believe you had Bonds in there. I know Bagwell. A lot of writers won't vote for Bonds. They won't vote for Clemens, who you also voted for. Me personally, I think that's what the game was then. I think it was, whether, proven not, I think that's what was going on. It's an even playing field. So I feel just vote on what they did. What's your whole take on that? And do you get a lot of pushback from people or, flack commentary about the way you vote?
Not necessarily about that. I mean, I voted for those guys, pretty much ever since they've been on the ballot. And I publish my ballot every year, and I write a blog to go along with it, and I publish that, and I put it out on Facebook. I put it out on Twitter. I get a pretty healthy discussion among fans with it every year. And, I mean, basically, I'm just tired of the whole argument about bonds, especially. I mean, I agree with you. It was the era they played in. Everybody, you either have to decide everybody did it or nobody did it, except for the guys who tested positive for drugs, like Palmero, A-Rod. Those guys go into a different category, and you take it into consideration when you vote for them or you don't vote for them. But the point of the matter is, with guys like Clemens and Bonds, who there really is no quantitative information, what they did or didn't do, except for, what Barry might have said in his leaked grand jury testimony and, what came out on Roger, in the Mitchell report. I mean, these guys were never there. There wasn't drug testing back then. There wasn't, it was illegal, but Major League Baseball chose not to press it, and they rode with it. And Major League Baseball basically has officially established that these guys have their records. That's all. I mean, Bonds is the official, according to Major League Baseball, all-time home run leader and single-season home run leader, just as Pete is the all-time hits leader because he gambled on the game, which to me, in baseball rules, is a much larger infraction than taking performance-enhancing drugs. They still didn't strip him of anything he did, and there's enough information now to prove that Pete bet while he was a player too. So it's just, that's the way it is. And for, Giancarlo Stanton to come out and say he's not sure whether Bonds is a legitimate home run leader, which, brings it all up again. I'm tired of it enough. It's just move on. It is what it is, whether you like it or not. And that's what it is. And so for me, the Hall of Fame, there's plenty of guys who, in the Hall of Fame who are, who've done, illegal things. There are spitballers in the Hall of Fame. There are guys who corked their bat. Hank Aaron hit as many home runs from pretty much as Bonds did from 35 to 40 as Barry did. That both are anomalies, and you have to question what did Aaron do? Did, as much as I love Cal, he played 2,500 some odd games in a row. For a lot of that streak, he played every inning in a row until his father sat him down. And you have to question really what did Cal do to do all that? I mean, it's not, and I'm not putting any dispersions on anybody. There's just, if you're not a thinking person, you're not going to question any of this. And so because you don't believe that Cal did anything, but you believe Barry did, that creates a completely different category. I think these guys just belong in the Hall of Fame. And actually, with Roger and Barry, there's enough people, enough new voters in the Hall of Fame voting now that are coming around that I think that within their 5 years left of eligibility, both of them are going to get in. And then, you've already got people like Bagwell and Piazza and Ricky Henderson. And, there are guys there who, certainly have been implied. Even Biggio, it's implied that there might have been some sort of steroid use at some point. So, and I'm not saying there is, but I'm saying it's implied, and, they're already in the Hall of Fame. So the gates are open, and, when La Russa Cox and Corey got into the Hall of Fame as managers 3 or 4 years ago, and whatever you want to say about them, whether they knew, they didn't know, it doesn't matter. They took advantage of all these players to establish records and win using rosters that were full of these players. You know, so, and now the commissioner, Bud, gets in, and whether he knew or not either doesn't make any difference. He presided over that era. So once you're getting all these people in, why are you ostracizing Barry and Clemens at this point? It doesn't make any sense. You know, Clemens was, along with Maddox, was the 2 top pitchers of his era in the Hall of Fame, and Barry stands above everybody else, you know, as one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. So, you know, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I think they should put Pete on our ballot, too, and let us decide whether he should be in the Hall of Fame, too. But that, and the Hall of Fame absolutely refuses to do that. And that's on the Hall of Fame. Not on Major League Baseball. It's not on anybody else. But I'd like to see them do that, too.
You mentioned Alex Rodriguez. Have you decided yet whether or not you will vote for him?
Yeah, I'm not voting for Alex to get in the Hall of Fame, that Barry and Rogers don't get into the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
So, yeah, if those 2 guys get in by the time Alex is on the ballot, which is going to be, what, in 5 years? You know, it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll make a decision on Alex, but, you know, Alex is in a completely different category because, you know, he was, you know, he admitted once that he did it. He was caught in that web down in Florida, you know, with the doctor down there, and, you know, and he was suspended for a year. So again, that's what you take all into consideration when, you know, you view a guy's candidacy for the Hall of Fame.
And Chipper Jones, would you say he's a shoo-in?
Yeah. I think Tomei and Jones this year are shoo-ins, and I would think, you know, Hoffman being 6 votes away and Vladdy Guerrero is close to 12 votes away or whatever he was last year. I think all those 4 are going in this year. You know, it's just too close. Those guys, you know, are going to go over the top this year. And I think, you know, Vizquel on the ballot, to me, he's a top shortstop in Major League Baseball history, too. You know, I'm going to vote for him. And I think it'll take him a few years, but I think eventually get in. You know, and then you're really going to have, you know, those years here where, you know, in 19 you have it's Mo, and then 20 it's Jeter, and, you know, those are going to be singular Hall of Fame classes at that point.
Right. And what about Edgar Martinez? I know you didn't vote for him last year, but will you vote for him this year?
Yeah, I've already, you know, put out my tentative 10 this year, and, you know, with, you know, all the guys we've voted in the last 3 or 4 years, you know, and Lee Smith coming off the ballot, Trammell coming off the ballot, Jack Morris coming off the ballot. There's now a little bit of room. And, you know, I voted for Edgar before, and he's just one of those guys that, for me, just got caught in the logjam because, you know, Barry and Clemens and Sosa and McGuire and all those guys stayed on the ballot for so long when they should have been voted in early on. And so I have 2 spots really at the end of it this year, and I'm thinking right now that I'll vote for Edgar and I'll vote for Larry Walker, who I think is a marginal Hall of Famer. But, you know, I do listen to the exchanges that I have with people, and, you know, I was convinced to vote for Bagwell. I didn't vote for him all the time by fans who made very good, you know, they made very good arguments for him, and I went back and restudied it and decided to vote for him then the next couple of years. And last year, everybody was on the boat with Martinez for whatever reason. He was the guy last year when he wasn't on my ballot. people were incensed about Martinez for whatever reason last year. Maybe it's the fact that, Riggs was getting in. Maybe it was the fact that, Ortiz is last year and, all of a sudden, Ortiz could wind up being the first, pure DH to go into the Hall of Fame rather than Edgar. I don't know what it was this year, but, I got more stuff about not having Martinez on the ballot. So, it's a good argument. And, I think Edgar's a very good player. I don't think he's a great player, but, he's certainly worth my vote if I have a ninth slot or a 10th slot open, which is, where I'll put him.
Yeah, and it's funny. For years, I've always said Martinez just falls short, and I too revisited it. And in the past couple of years, I'm like, yeah, it's like, while he wasn't the big home run hitter, he had sustained consistency. He didn't hit the long ball, but he had doubles. He didn't strike out a ton. He walked a lot and lots of RBIs. So now, while a lot of people say, well, RBIs are also an effect of your teammates. Nonetheless, you still have to hit. To produce.
Yeah, I don't get
RBIs.
that argument. I'm fine with a lot of the metrics now that are used in baseball, but this argument about the RBI is just, it's a team game. Of course, you have to have teammates on base to be able to generate, but if that's your job, to knock in people who are on base ahead of you, that's why they build batting orders the way they do, where they have people who get on base at the top of the order and people who can knock them in the middle of it. So basically, you're just doing the job that management is expecting you to do, and you're being paid for. And then the other thing is this whole thing about, Edgar being the DH. That wasn't his choice. Lou decided up there that he was short as a third baseman after some injuries, that he was better fitted for that team to be the DH. So why would I penalize Edgar for the fact that his manager decided to put him into a position that he was in because it was a managerial decision? No. I think that's another thing people have to get over, aside from the steroid thing. That's another thing people have to get over with the Hall of Fame voting about, putting DHs in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, tell me something. Do you have an award vote this year? I know.
Yeah,
writers usually.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, can you tell us? We don't want to. We know you can't tell us. Of course, who you will vote for, but can you tell us which award you'll be voting for?
Yeah, I'm voting for the second year in a row. I'm voting for the National League Manager of the Year.
Okay, so you'd say it's pretty. Would you say it's pretty safe that Bellinger and Judge are the rookies of the year?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and MVPs. What's your opinion?
That's been a question I've been getting, recently, and to me, I watch him all the time. Goldschmidt is just a great hidden jewel, because nobody pays attention to the Diamondbacks. They're not on national TV. Kind of like where Hoffman and Gwynn were back in the years with the Padres. Unless you're an aficionado of the game, you don't know how good a player Paul Goldschmidt is. And his numbers are unbelievable this year. Not that they're not always, and the kid he's a great kid. He's a fundamentally sound player. He does so many different things. And then if you watch him play, he's a flawless first baseman. He runs the bases, steals bases. He's as good as Trout in my mind. He really is. And, a smart player, where he just does the right things. taking the extra base, going from second to third on a fly ball to right field, all the things that you're supposed to do. You don't see him make very many mistakes out there. So to me, if I had an MVP vote in the National League this year, I'd be very hard pressed not to vote for him. But then you look at the season that Stanton's having, and all his numbers are not only better than Goldschmidt, they're much better. And the only area that he falls short, I think, is really in batting average and on base percentage. That's where Goldschmidt has them. But as far as all the power numbers, it's hard not to vote for Stanton with 53 home runs and a shot at getting to 60 this year. Even though, I'm an old timer when it comes to the whole of my MVP vote, as much I think it's what does that guy contribute to his team during the season with all the personal stats that he's putting up. And obviously Goldschmidt is a much bigger ingredient to what the Diamondbacks are doing this year than what, Stanton is doing for the Marlins. But so I'd be conflicted on it, but I'd probably vote Stanton 1-2. And over in the American League, somebody asked me about that yesterday, whether, I'd go Altuve or Trout. And, with Trout, he's on a team this year that finally has a chance to make the playoffs and is playing way above its head. I think Scioscia's done maybe the best job of his career keeping that team competitive with their pitching and bullpen and, the fact that Trout was even out a month with the ligament damage in his thumb from the slide into second base at first. So, it would be hard for me not to vote for Trout again, too.
So, yeah, I guess for me, I'm conflicted with Goldschmidt and Stanton. The other advantage I have to give to Stanton is he's hitting a lot of those home runs in a huge park.
Right.
And so,
no doubt.
And again, it's like, and he is a big part of that team, and they've made a surge. When they did make some type of surge in the second half. He just, he's on a team that has no pitching whatsoever. Trout, I guess, you know what? He missed more than a month, but right now, if I was going to vote today, I would probably go with Altuve. And but it's like you can't be wrong voting for either one, in my opinion.
Right. Look, I've got to go here. So
okay,
let's wrap this up.
Okay, great. Barry, thank you for coming on. I truly appreciate it. And
it's fine if you want to ask me one more question, but
well, I guess we can cap it off with the Cy Young. Who would be your picks for Cy Young?
National League, to me, it's Kershaw, Greinke. Kershaw, even with him missing a month, he came back. He's pitching tonight. He's 16-2 with a 2 ERA. His strikeout to walk ratio is incredible. And if he continues to have a great rest of the month, it's hard not to give it to him. But Greinke's had really an unbelievable year, too, not as good as he did 2 years ago for the Dodgers. But without him, the Diamondbacks would be nowhere. And, he's 16-6, and he's 13-1 at home. He's just had a great season. So, either one of those two will be fine with me. And over in the American League for a while, I know it was Sale, Kluber, neck and neck. But Sale, I think, he's tailed off a little bit. And Kluber, to me, is the best starting pitcher by far in the American League. He's a Cy Young Award winner again.
I agree on both. Barry, thank you for coming on. I hope we can get you back on again another time. And you have a great night. Enjoy the rest of the season.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good luck with the hurricane.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, folks, that wraps up this week's show. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week when the winds have died down and the skies are a little drier. Good night.